Snoozy William learned early that pain had a sound. It wasn't the slap itself. That was sharp, sudden, like a firecracker. It was what came after. The wet gasp his mother made when the air was knocked out of her lungs. The way the floorboards groaned under her knees. The whispering sobs she tried to smother into the carpet so the neighbors wouldn't hear. William lay on his mattress in the corner of the room, the springs biting into his back through the thin fabric. He pressed his hands over his ears, but it never helped. The walls in the house were thin. The walls remembered. His stepfather, Frank, had a voice like gravel in a blender. Low, grinding, full of menace even when he laughed. Especially when he laughed. William learned to measure the night by the sound of Frank's boots hitting the floor. Slow steps meant drinking. Fast steps meant rage. Either way, someone was going to hurt. Sometimes Frank noticed William watching from the hallway. "Smiling again, freak," Frank would say, though William wasn't smiling. His face just froze that way sometimes, muscles locked in terror. Frank would lean down, breath thick with rot and beer, and whisper things meant to rot a child from the inside out. "You like this, don't you?" Watching. William learned not to cry. Crying only made it worse. The birth of a smile school wasn't safer. William was thin, pale, always tired. He smelled like old smoke and fear. Other kids learned quickly that he didn't fight back. They took his lunch. They shoved him into lockers. They laughed when he flinched at loud noises. One day, during a school assembly, a clown performed. The man's face was painted white, mouth stretched wide in a red grin that never moved. He juggled, tripped, pretended to cry, then laughed too hard. The children screamed with delight. William didn't laugh. He stared. Because the clown's smile didn't change, no matter what happened. No matter how hard he fell, no matter how loudly the children laughed at him. The smile protected him, William realized. That night, after Frank passed out on the couch, William stood in the bathroom and painted his face with his mother's old makeup. White foundation, red lipstick dragged too far across his cheeks. He smiled at the mirror until his jaw ached. When he smiled, he felt empty, and the emptiness didn't hurt. Running away, William ran away at 14. He didn't pack much, just clothes, a notebook filled with drawings of smiling faces, and the certainty that if he stayed, something inside him would finish breaking. He followed railroad tracks, slept under overpasses, learned how hunger made thoughts strange and sharp. That was when the circus found him. Or maybe when he found the circus. The tents were old and sagging, colors faded like bruises. The people were broken in familiar ways, missing fingers, haunted eyes, smiles that didn't quite reach where they should. The ringmaster saw William watching from the shadows and didn't ask questions. "You smile like someone who knows pain," the man said. William joined that night. They named him Snoozy because he never slept and always looked half dreaming, eyes wide and distant. His makeup became permanent in a way, his real smile slowly forgetting how to exist without paint. What the audience never sees at first, Snoozy was harmless. He tripped over his shoes. He honked horns. He made children laugh. But something inside him fed on the sound. Laughter wasn't joy. It was control. It was the same sound Frank used to make before the house went quiet and broken. Snoozy learned to twist it, to stretch it too long, to hold eye contact a second longer than comfortable. People laughed because they didn't know what else to do. Backstage, Snoozy practiced new expressions in the mirror. Smiles that bent wrong. Eyes that didn't blink. He learned how fear smelled when people didn't realize they were afraid yet. The circus began to change. Animals refused to enter the ring when Snoozy was near. Other performers avoided him. Sometimes someone would go missing, a drifter, a rude spectator, a worker who drank too much and wandered into the dark. No one ever saw anything. But Snoozy's smile grew wider. The first night, the first time Snoozy crossed the line, it wasn't planned. A man cornered him behind the tents, drunk and cruel, laughing the same laugh William remembered from childhood. The man grabbed Snoozy's arm and squeezed too hard. Something old and screaming woke up. Later, the man was gone. Snoozy washed his hands until the water ran cold. He stared at his reflection, paint smeared, eyes glowing with something like relief. For the first time in his life, William felt safe. The monster learned his name after that. It became easier. Snoozy didn't think of people as people anymore. They were sounds, reactions, punchlines waiting to be delivered. Fear became a language he spoke fluently. The circus packed up often. New towns, new crowds, new disappearances. Rumors followed, whispers of a clown who stared too long, who appeared in mirrors, who left laughter echoing where it didn't belong. William faded. Snoozy remained. Sometimes, late at night, Snoozy would hear crying and realize it was coming from his own mouth. Sometimes he'd dream of his mother, still kneeling on the carpet, still whispering apologies to no one. And sometimes, rarely, he would smile without paint. Those were the nights he hurt the most. The final act one night, the circus burned. No one ever agreed on how it started. Faulty wiring. A tipped lantern. Sabotage. They found Snoozy standing in the ashes, face untouched by soot, smiling as tents collapsed around him. He didn't try to escape. He didn't need to. Some say he died there. Others swear they still see him. A clown standing at the edge of crowds. A smile that lasts too long. A laugh that sounds like pain learning how to breathe. And if you ever hear it, soft at first, then closer, don't laugh back. Because Snoozy loves an audience. South Jersey. By 15, William had learned that prayer was just another word for begging into darkness. The churches near his neighborhood smelled like old wood and guilt. He had gone once with his mother, years before Frank moved in, and turned the house into something that breathed wrong at night. William remembered the pastor's voice. Soft, reassuring, promising order. None of it had helped. God had never come down the hallway when the shouting started. God had never stopped the thud of a body hitting the wall. So William stopped praying upward. Instead, he prayed down. The prayer had started as a whisper, because whispering was safer. William knelt on the cracked linoleum of his bedroom floor, the light bulb overhead flickering like a dying thought. The room smelled of dust, old sweat, and the copper tang of fear that never left him. From the living room came the familiar sounds, Frank's boots, the clink of a bottle. The television turned up too loud to hide anything. William pressed his forehead to the floor. "If you're real," he said quietly, voice shaking, "then you already know what he does." His hands trembled. His nails were bitten down to the quick. He had stolen a library book weeks ago, not about God, but about the other one. The pages were thin, the illustrations crude, but the words had burned themselves into him. "They say you listen when no one else does," William continued. "They say you don't pretend to be kind." The house creaked. Frank laughed at something on TV. William flinched but kept going. "I don't want forgiveness," he said. "I don't want mercy. I just want it to stop." Silence followed, thick, waiting, like breath held too long. William felt foolish, ashamed. He almost stood up. Then the room grew cold in a way that had nothing to do with the weather. The dream that night. William dreamed deeper than he ever had before. He wasn't falling. Falling implied fear. This was travel, smooth and inevitable, like being pulled by a current that had chosen him long ago. Heat pressed in from all sides, but it didn't burn. It watched. The ground beneath his feet was black glass, reflecting a sky with no stars, only slow, turning shapes, like thoughts too large to understand. The air smelled of iron and smoke and something old enough to remember the first lie. "You asked," a voice said. It came from everywhere and nowhere, layered with others beneath it. Laughter, screaming, whispers speaking languages that hurt to hear. William turned. Satan did not have horns. He was tall, impossibly so, draped in something like shadow pretending to be a body. His face shifted constantly, not changing, but remembering. Every cruelty William had ever witnessed flickered there for a moment before dissolving. "You didn't pray for strength," Satan said calmly. "You didn't pray for escape." William swallowed. His throat felt dry, but his fear was different here. Cleaner, sharper. "I prayed for justice," William said, "or revenge. I don't know the difference anymore." Satan smiled, not kindly, not cruelly, but with interest. "Good," he said. "People who know the difference bore me." The conversation they walked, though William didn't remember choosing to move. The glass beneath their feet rippled with images. Rooms like his own, other children kneeling, other prayers spoken in desperation rather than faith. "You know what you're asking for," Satan said. "Once acted upon, there is no undoing." William thought of his mother's bruises, of the way Frank's voice changed when the door closed. "I already live with consequences," he said. "I just don't choose them." Satan stopped. "Tell me about him." William did. Every detail. The nights, the shouting, the way Frank's presence filled rooms like poison gas. He spoke until his voice broke, until words became raw things pulled from inside him. When he finished, Satan nodded slowly. "You do not want to kill him," Satan said. "You want him answered." William looked up, startled. "Yes," he whispered. "I want him to know." "Then you will need help," Satan continued. "Not brute force, not childish violence. You need precision. You need fear that thinks." He raised a hand and the air split like skin. From it stepped something tall and graceful, its form humanoid but wrong in subtle ways, too still, too aware. Its eyes were calm, ancient, and deeply attentive. "This is Salos," Satan said. "A duke. He understands attachment, obsession, and the slow unraveling of a mind that believes itself untouchable." Salos inclined his head slightly toward William, like a courtier greeting a future king. "You are wounded," Salos said, voice smooth and intimate, as though already inside William's thoughts wounded things see truth. Clearly William's heart pounded. "What will he do?" Satan answered instead. "He will not act for you," Satan said. "He will act through circumstance, through suggestion, through nights that do not rest easily. Your stepfather will begin to doubt himself, then the world, then reality." William hesitated. "And me?" Satan's eyes burned brighter for a moment. "You will carry this," he said. "Power is not given freely, but you already carry pain. This will simply give it direction." Salos stepped closer, kneeling so they were eye level. "When the time comes," the demon said, "you will not need to raise a hand. You will only need to watch and understand." William nodded. For the first time in his life, something had listened all the way through. Waking William woke with his heart racing, sweat soaking the sheets. Morning light crept through the blinds. The house was quiet, too quiet. From the living room came Frank's voice, Low, uncertain, as if speaking to someone who wasn't there. William sat up slowly. He didn't smile. Not yet. But somewhere deep inside him, something ancient and patient had begun to work. The Mark William woke before dawn, gasping. At first he thought the pain was phantom, another leftover echo from the dream, like the feeling of falling when you're already awake. But the ache was real, pulsing beneath his ribs, deep and insistent. His chest felt tight, as if something had pressed into him from the inside out. He staggered into the bathroom and turned on the light. The mirror reflected a boy too thin for his age, eyes ringed with exhaustion. But it was what lay beneath that stole the breath from his lungs. Carved into his chest, just left of the sternum, was a symbol, not scratched, not shallow, etched. The lines were precise, clean, geometric, in a way no human hand could replicate while asleep. The skin around it was inflamed but not bleeding, as if the mark had been there longer than it should have. It seemed to sink into him the longer he stared, like it didn't belong only on the surface. William recognized it immediately. He had seen it ripple through the glass beneath his feet in the dream. He had seen it hover behind Satan's shoulder, faint but constant, like a signature. Salos. The pain faded as understanding took its place. This was not a threat. It was a contract. The plan William didn't rush. That was the first thing Salos impressed upon him, not in words, but in instinct. Fear rushed. Revenge waited. For weeks, William observed his stepfather with a clarity that felt unnatural. Frank's habits became patterns. His moods became predictable cycles. His cruelty followed rhythms that could be measured, anticipated, conducted. Salos whispered only when necessary. Patience. William learned where Frank hid his bottles. He learned which nights he drank alone and which nights he sought an audience. He learned which walls in the house muffled sound and which carried it down the street. Most importantly, he learned Frank's greatest weakness. Frank believed the house belonged to him. William began altering it. At first, it was subtle. Objects moved, just enough to be doubted. Doors left ajar. The television turning on by itself late at night, tuned to static heavy channels. The smell of sulfur, not strong, just faint enough to be dismissed as faulty wiring or old pipes. Frank started sleeping less. Then William escalated. Symbols, the same one on his chest, appeared in places Frank would find when alone, behind the water heater. Scratched faintly into the wood inside the closet. Drawn in ash on the concrete floor of the basement. Frank laughed at first. Then he stopped laughing. By the third week, Frank was convinced someone was watching him. By the fourth, he was right. The night William chose a night when the rain wouldn't stop. Rain erased footsteps. Rain swallowed sound. Rain made neighbors stay inside and mind their own business. Frank came home drunk and furious, shouting at shadows, knocking over furniture, demanding answers from rooms that didn't respond. William stayed hidden, heart steady, breath controlled. Salos did not speak. He didn't need to. The basement light flickered on. What happened next was not fast, and it was not chaotic. It was deliberate. Frank descended into a space that no longer belonged to him. Every wall bore symbols now, dozens of them, carved, painted, burned into surfaces with obsessive symmetry. The air felt wrong, heavy, as if sound itself struggled to move. Frank screamed. The neighbors later reported hearing shouting, then silence so sudden it felt unnatural. By morning, William was gone. From the desk of the county sheriff, Morning Edition local man found dead in suspected ritualistic homicide, authorities were called to a residence early Sunday morning, following reports of a disturbance the previous night. The victim, identified as Franklin H., was found deceased in the basement of his home under circumstances investigators described as deeply unusual. According to detectives, the basement walls were covered floor to ceiling in symbols resembling occult markings. Some were carved directly into wood and concrete, others drawn in substances still under forensic analysis. No sign of forced entry was found. There were no clear signs of a struggle, said Detective Raymond Kessler during a press briefing. That's what's unsettling. The scene suggests preparation, not impulse. Investigators noted that the victim appeared to have been psychologically distressed prior to death, citing overturned furniture upstairs and multiple empty alcohol containers. Neighbors described increasingly erratic behavior in the weeks leading up to the incident. The victim's stepson, 15-year-old William H., is considered missing. Authorities believe he fled the scene sometime during the night. No blood trail was found outside the residence, leading detectives to believe the boy left calmly. This wasn't a runaway situation, Kessler added. This was someone leaving behind something they'd finished. The case remains open. The road William didn't look back. He followed highway south, then west. He slept where he could. The symbol on his chest no longer hurt. It felt warm, grounding, like a hand resting over his heart. At a run-down carnival outside a small Pennsylvania town, he heard laughter again. It sounded familiar. The circus tents loomed against the evening sky, their colors faded but alive. Performers moved like ghosts between trailers. A clown sat alone near a fire, wiping grease paint from his face, his smile lingering even after the paint was gone. William stopped walking. Salos stirred, satisfied. William stepped forward. The boy from New Jersey disappeared that night. Something else took his place. Something that smiled too easily, watched too closely, and understood fear not as a weakness, but as a language. Snoozy, and the traveling gospel of laughter by the time William became Snoozy. The circus had already learned not to ask questions. He arrived thin, quiet, and obedient. He learned routines faster than anyone else. His smile, wide, unchanging, wrong, never faltered, even when slapped on the back too hard or shoved aside by drunk patrons. He slept little, ate less, and spent long hours wandering the midway after closing, touching the rides like a priest blessing relics. The rides responded to him. Operators swore machines behaved differently when Snoozy was near. Brakes delayed by seconds, lights flickering out of sequence, motors humming at pitches just shy of comfortable. Maintenance crews found nothing wrong. Inspections passed, and then people started dying. Case 1, Trenton, New Jersey, the Ferris wheel incident victim, male, 42, local landlord background, multiple unresolved complaints of tenant abuse. Intimidation police report summary. Witnesses reported the victim entered the Ferris wheel alone near closing time. The operator, dressed as a clown later identified as Snoozy, was seen assisting him into the gondola. No irregularities were reported at the time. Approximately 12 minutes later, the ride was stopped due to a mechanical issue. The victim was found unresponsive inside the gondola. Investigators noted the safety bar was engaged. No signs of forced restraint. The gondola itself bore strange markings etched into the interior paint, symbols later dismissed as vandalism, though their precision suggested otherwise. Cause of death was ruled accidental, attributed to panic-induced cardiac failure. One officer noted in an internal memo, "It's like the ride didn't fail. It waited." Case 2, Allentown, Pennsylvania, the Tunnel of Love victim, female, 36. Social worker, under investigation for embezzlement background. Allegations of withholding aid from vulnerable clients, news excerpt. The victim entered the Tunnel of Love ride shortly before midnight. The ride stalled midway through the course. Emergency lights failed to activate immediately. When maintenance accessed the tunnel, The victim was found seated upright in the boat, eyes open, hands clenched around the sides. No water damage, no visible injuries. However, the walls of the tunnel were covered in chalk-like symbols not present earlier that evening. Security footage from the entrance showed a clown waving cheerfully as the victim entered, then standing motionless for the duration of the ride. Investigators described the scene as emotionally disturbing, citing the victim's expression as one of profound realization. Case 3. Akron, Ohio, the tilt-a-whirl victim. Male, 29, former fraternity member background, history of violent hazing incidents. Detective briefing notes. Ride attendants reported the victim insisted on riding alone multiple times. On the final cycle, the ride's rotational pattern changed unpredictably, though controls indicated standard operation. Witnesses recalled laughter coming from the ride long after music stopped. The victim was discovered collapsed in his seat when the ride halted. Medical examiners cited internal trauma consistent with extreme stress, combined with sudden deceleration, though ride diagnostics showed no mechanical anomaly. Symbols were found scratched beneath the ride platform, again dismissed as graffiti. One technician resigned the next morning. Case 4. Des Moines, Iowa, the House of Mirrors victim. Male, 51%, former police officer background, allegedly falsified evidence in multiple cases. Incident report. The victim entered the attraction alone. Patrons later complained they could hear shouting inside, arguments with no second voice. When staff entered, they found multiple mirrors shattered from the inside. The victim was discovered kneeling at the center, surrounded by fragments etched with identical sigils. The mirrors reflected nothing at certain angles. Security footage showed Snoozy standing at the entrance, silently holding the door closed for several minutes before reopening it and bowing. The death was ruled unexplained. Case 5. Sioux Falls, South Dakota, the funhouse slide victim. Female, 24, influencer background, known for exploiting vulnerable followers in financial schemes. Media coverage. The victim was last seen live streaming from the top of the funhouse slide, laughing and mocking the attraction. The live stream cut abruptly. She was found at the bottom moments later. The slide was dry. No obstructions, no witnesses saw a fall. Investigators noted the walls of the slide interior were coated with handprints. Too many for one person, overlapping and distorted, all pointing downward. Snoozy was seen cleaning the slide afterward, humming softly. Case 6. Boise, Idaho, the carousel victim. Male, 63, former factory owner background, accused of covering up multiple workplace fatalities. Coroner's summary. The victim was riding the carousel after hours with special permission. Surveillance shows Snoozy assisting him onto a horse, tightening the safety belt personally. The carousel ran for exactly 13 rotations. When it stopped, the victim was slumped forward, face frozen in an expression witnesses described as childlike terror. Every horse bore a freshly painted symbol beneath its saddle. No mechanical failure was found. Case 7. Eugene, Oregon, the drop tower victim. Male, 34, online extremist organizer background, linked to multiple hate-based harassment campaigns. Federal involvement summary. The drop tower experienced a brief but documented delay at peak height. Riders reported hearing laughter over the intercom, unrecognized by staff. The victim was found seated after the ride completed, restrained properly. He did not scream. Investigators discovered carved symbols inside the operator's booth, identical to those found in earlier incidents across several states. By the time authorities attempted to detain the clown seen operating the ride, the circus had already left town. Pattern recognition. Internal FBI memo. The deaths follow a consistent moral profile. Victims share histories of exploitation, abuse, or systemic harm. No evidence suggests random selection. The suspect, if singular, exhibits ritualistic behavior tied to mobile infrastructure. The circus is not the crime scene. The rides are. Snoozy within the circus, Snoozy became something like a saint. Rides ran smoother when he worked them. Crowds laughed harder. Children adored him. Animals refused to approach him at night. Snoozy stood alone among the silent machines, tracing symbols into grease and dust, whispering names only Salos seemed to hear. He did not believe he was killing. He believed he was correcting, and somewhere deep beneath the paint, the boy from New Jersey slept peacefully for the first time in his life. The capture of Snoozy the circus was already packing when it finally ended. It wasn't a chase. There were no sirens screaming through midway lights or officers tackling a painted figure to the dirt. That would have been too simple. Too human. Snoozy was taken at dawn outside a fairground in western Illinois, standing perfectly still beside the Ferris wheel, hands folded in front of him as if waiting to be addressed. When federal agents approached, weapons drawn, he did not run. He did not resist. He did not even blink. Witnesses later said he smiled wider when they read his name aloud. "What took you so long?" he asked calmly. That question would appear, underlined twice, in the arresting agent's report. Unraveling the pattern by the time Snoozy was in custody, the scope of what followed the circus had become impossible to ignore. Forensic task forces from multiple states convened. Ride schematics were compared. Victim histories aligned with disturbing precision. The symbols, dismissed for years as vandalism or coincidence, were finally treated as intentional repeated signatures. 30 deaths, 30 cities, one traveling show. Each victim fit a profile that detectives struggled to discuss openly. People who had never been convicted, never formally punished, but who left long trails of quiet devastation behind them. A senior investigator would later say off record, "It felt less like we were investigating a murderer and more like we were auditing a ledger." Interrogation Snoozy, real name William H., was interrogated over the course of 9 days. He never asked for a lawyer. He never denied anything. He answered questions politely, sometimes helpfully, sometimes cryptically. When asked how he selected his victims, he tilted his head and said, "They selected themselves." When asked about the symbols, he corrected the interviewer. "They aren't symbols," he said. "They're doors." Psychologists noted that he spoke with complete emotional regulation. No spikes in stress, no visible guilt, no pleasure either, just certainty. When shown photographs of victims, Snoozy reacted only once. It was a picture of his stepfather. His smile vanished for exactly 3 seconds. The trial could not be held in a single jurisdiction. Instead, federal prosecutors consolidated the charges under interstate homicide statutes. The press called it the Carnival Trial. Protesters gathered outside courthouses. Families of victims demanded explanations that no one could give. Snoozy was charged with 30 counts of first-degree murder. He pleaded guilty to all of them, not as a bargain, not as a strategy. When asked by the judge if he understood the gravity of his plea, Snoozy nodded. "Yes," he said, "gravity is very important." The courtroom went silent. Sentencing complications execution was considered. So was life imprisonment. But neither option survived psychiatric review. Every evaluator, state, federal, civilian, military, returned the same conclusion. William H. was criminally responsible and fundamentally incompatible with conventional incarceration. One report read, "This subject does not deteriorate in isolation. He organizes. He adapts. He influences." Another stated, "If housed among the general prison population, The psychological effect on inmates and staff would be unpredictable and potentially catastrophic. The decision was made quietly, not publicly debated, not widely announced. William H. would be remanded to a long-term psychiatric facility that did not officially exist on any modern map. Pebblebrook Asylum, 1972. Pebblebrook sat far from highways, tucked into a valley where fog settled like a habit. It had been built decades earlier for patients deemed irreconcilable with society. The building was stone, window slits narrow, corridors designed to confuse rather than comfort. When Snoozy arrived in late 1972, staff were instructed not to use his stage name. They failed almost immediately. He asked for grease paint during intake. The request was denied. He smiled anyway. Intake report. Excerpt patient, William H. alias. Snoozy age, 23 diagnosis, severe antisocial pathology. Dissociative fixation. Religious delusion. Non-standard. Ritualistic ideation notes. Patient displays no signs of remorse. Exhibits heightened awareness of staff behavior. Symbols carved into personal effects confiscated during transfer. Patient insists they were already there. During physical examination, staff noted a scar-like marking on the chest resembling a geometric sigil. Patient refused to discuss its origin. When asked if he felt fear about his confinement, patient responded, "I've always lived in closed rooms." Life inside Pebblebrook changed after Snoozy arrived. Patients reported laughter at night when no one was awake. Orderlies complained of rides in their dreams, spinning, rising, stopping just short of something terrible. Chalk symbols began appearing in places cameras couldn't see, behind radiators, under beds, inside locked cabinets. Snoozy was model behavior. He followed schedules, ate meals, attended sessions, sat quietly during group therapy, listening more than speaking. Doctors noted something unsettling. He doesn't deteriorate. He settles in. When asked what he missed about the outside world, Snoozy answered honestly. "The crowds," he said, "but they'll come back." Closing observation officially, the case was closed. 30 murders, 1 guilty plea, 1 lifetime commitment. But Pebblebrook's records contain a final handwritten note, unsigned, dated 6 months after Snoozy S. arrival. Patient has begun referring to the facility as a tent that doesn't know it's traveling. Recommendation: do not ask follow-up questions. Somewhere deep in the asylum, a man with a painted smile slept soundly, surrounded by locked doors, convinced, absolutely, that he was exactly where he needed to be, and that the show was only paused. The last act, Pebblebrook Asylum, recorded William H.'s death as self-inflicted, though the word never appeared in the same sentence as understood. The night it happened was quiet, unnaturally so. No patients screamed, no alarms tripped. The halls seemed to hold their breath. Orderly Thomas Reeve found him just before morning rounds. William had prepared carefully. That much was clear even without spectacle or mess. He had arranged his room as if it were a stage, bed straightened, shoes aligned beneath it, hands folded neatly in his lap. His face, untouched by paint for years, wore the faintest suggestion of a smile, the kind that comes from certainty rather than happiness. Pinned to the wall with a bent spoon was a scrap of paper torn from a therapy notebook. On it, drawn with meticulous precision, was the same sigil that had followed him from childhood to circus to cell. Below it a single sentence: "Intermission is over." There was no note of despair, no apology, no plea. The doctors would later argue whether William had been suicidal at all, or whether he had simply departed. After death, Pebblebrook did not return to normal. Within days, Staff began reporting disturbances that did not align with any known pattern of patient behavior. Laughter echoed down locked corridors at night, soft at first, then layered, overlapping, as if multiple voices were trying to remember how to laugh at the same time. Lights flickered only in certain wings. Doors opened that required 2 keys turned simultaneously. Most unsettling were the symbols. They appeared again, not scratched or painted, but condensed, as though the walls themselves had exhaled them. Staff scrubbed and repainted, only to find the markings returned by morning, always in places where someone had recently expressed fear, anger, or guilt. Several patients refused to leave their rooms, insisting the clown was walking the halls. But cameras showed nothing. The haunting the first staff member to openly speak to the presence was Nurse Eleanor Whitcomb. She had worked Pebblebrook for nearly 20 years, and believed very little surprised her anymore. One night, while charting alone at the nurses' station, she heard the unmistakable sound of a carnival tune. Thin, warped, as if remembered rather than played. She looked up. At the end of the hall stood a figure outlined in shadow, tall, still, watching. "I know you," she said quietly, surprising herself. The figure tilted its head. From that night on, Eleanor reported conversations, not voices in her head, but responses in the environment. Lights dimming in acknowledgement, doors clicking softly in answer, laughter rippling through the pipes when she spoke his name. "Snoozy?" she whispered once. The temperature dropped, just slightly. The séance by the late 1980s, Pebblebrook, had been shuttered. Abandoned facilities attracted rumors the way wounds attract flies. Paranormal investigators, urban explorers, and spiritualists all tried their hand at contacting what they believed haunted the asylum. One group succeeded. The séance took place in the old recreation hall, candles arranged in a circle where patients once watched static-filled television. The air was heavy, expectant. Dust hung unmoving. They called him carefully. Not William. Not Patient H. They said the name that had survived him. Snoozy. The candles bent inward as if listening. A voice emerged, not spoken aloud, but carried through the table itself, vibrations trembling through wood and bone. "You're late," it said. The medium struggled to breathe. What are you?" There was a pause, then amusement. "I'm what happens when applause doesn't stop." They asked him why he stayed. The response came slowly, deliberately. "Because this place remembers me." Finally, they asked the question that mattered. "If you could be anywhere," the medium whispered, "where would you want to be?" The temperature plunged. Laughter, joyless and electric, rippled through the room. His answer, a circus, the voice said. "But not the kind you think." Images flooded the medium's mind. Spinning lights, endless crowds, sound systems stacked like altars. A booth elevated above chaos, wires snaking like veins, turntables glowing red and gold. "I don't want the ring," Snoozy continued. "I want control of the noise." They asked what music he would play. The answer came with reverence. DJ Salos. The name carried weight. The candles flared violently. "He already knows the rhythm," Snoozy added. "He taught me how to listen." The séance ended abruptly. 2 participants fainted. One never returned to the building again, but the asylum felt emptier afterward. Release within weeks, the hauntings stopped. No laughter, no symbols, no presence. Urban explorers reported the halls felt hollow now, stripped of pressure, like a tent after teardown. Whatever had lingered there had finally left, and somewhere far below, Not beneath the earth, but beneath meaning, a new circus roared to life. The circus below this circus had no sky. Its tents were made of shadow and flame, stitched together by screams that had learned how to harmonize. The crowd was endless, souls packed shoulder to shoulder, desperate not for escape, but for sensation. At the center rose a booth forged from bone and steel. Behind it stood Snoozy, not a ghost, not a man, something refined. His face bore paint again, perfect and permanent. His smile was wide and glorious. His hands danced over controls that shaped fear into sound, despair into rhythm. Bass lines thundered like ritual drums. Lights pulsed in sigils older than language. Above the booth, etched in fire, was a name. DJ Salos. The crowd moved as one. Snoozy leaned into the microphone, voice layered with laughter, echoing across eternity. "Ladies and gentlemen," he purred, "welcome back to the show." And for the first time since childhood, he was exactly where he wanted to be. The asylum doors remained locked. But the music never stopped.